Hello, Robs. We're back with Anyone's Son, a true story by Roberta Roche with Harry de la Roche Jr. 26. At another school, the Citadel, the Sunday night phone call that came from John Greer also made everyone say, but these things just don't happen to the people you know. I returned from Thanksgiving around 9 p.m., said Harry's senior, Walt Singleton, and all of a sudden the guard came to say Captain Sawtell wanted to see me. I was trying to figure what I'd done wrong when I learned that Hank Gill, Harry's squad sergeant, had also been told to report. Captain Sawtell seemed silent and stunned when we got to him. Have you talked to newspaper people? He asked. The two cadets both told him no, and looked and felt perplexed. This concerns Mr. De La Roche, Captain Sawtell finally said. What happened? Walt Singleton asked him. The captain hesitated before he said, he killed some people today. On the highway? Singleton inquired. No, he shot them, the captain answered. That caught Walt Singleton completely off guard, and like many people in Montvale, he simply couldn't believe it. I had noticed the gentleness and sensitivity about Harry, he declared. I'd also noted his feelings towards life. So I didn't think he'd be capable of doing anything like that. As the news started filtering to barracks and homes, the state of shock continued. I heard it first on the radio, said Captain Harry Axon, Harry's military science teacher, and I listened twice to be absolutely sure that what I'd heard was real. Pete Salerno, who'd been unable to bring Harry's dress uniform home, was in formation on Sunday night when he heard the name De La Roche. I turned and asked what had happened, he reported, and then when I heard the story, I said, you can't be serious. I absolutely couldn't believe it. I didn't know what to say. Now I wish I could have talked to him more when I spoke to him on Thanksgiving. But as soon as he found out about the uniform, he hung up, and that was it. Now I realized his reaction was strange, but of course, he was getting closer to the time when he'd have to come back. He was jittery and nervous and anxious to get off the phone. That was the last I heard of him. He wasn't like the Harry I knew. Harry didn't wait for the good times here. When he knew it was time to come back, he must have been thinking about it and what was going to happen when he returned to school. Before Thanksgiving, Mr. De La Roche seemed to be in serious need to go home, commented Colonel D.D. Nicholson, Jr., Vice President for Development. But it's hard to conceive he had any ulterior motive. He could have picked up and left at any time, so why go through all this? Now that this has happened, we're being taken apart by the media who say, in a military college, wouldn't you verify the nature of an illness before granting an early leave? We answer, of course, we wouldn't. We work on an honor system, and if somebody within the Corps says he has a family illness, we believe him. It's not a normal procedure to grant an early leave as we did for Mr. De La Roche, but both his TAC officer and his senior were so zealous and concerned in their effort to help him, we felt we had a responsibility to let him go in this case. On the surface, the multiple murders were kept fairly quiet on campus, but speculation on the whys was just as prevalent in Charleston as it was back home in Montvale. Some saw Harry as an introvert, a cadet who kept to himself. Others said he was quiet and shy, but had only the normal difficulties freshmen would have adjusting. Maybe of all the freshmen, he might have had it the toughest in N Company, admitted one of his former roommates, but that was only because he brought it on himself. To some, he was one of the worst guys in the company as far as getting along with other people, put in another cadet. Something was boiling in him, and it just boiled over. His tactical officer, Captain Sawtell, thought he'd be back when he left. To me, he was an average freshman, stated Captain Sawtell. He got into difficulty and he was uncoordinated. But you look at any freshman, he's confused. It's a brand new life. I didn't see him a great deal of the time, but I felt that in the time he was here, he came along with the rest of the freshmen. He wasn't in front of the class, but he was by no means at the rear either. The physical requirements didn't hurt him, and he was able to run as well, if not better, than many of the upperclassmen. I might say one thing. that turned some people off was the way he'd come in and ask the same questions each day at almost the same time, like, what time is formation, or what time is the first bugle? When you've asked that question once, you've asked it. But he'd come to morning, noon, and evening formation and say, what time is bugle call? In general, though, the way he walked in at the beginning of the year was just about the way he walked out before Thanksgiving. But something went wrong along the way. I was his squad sergeant for 4 weeks, and no squad sergeant is the most liked person on campus, admitted David Sullivan. In fact, I know Harry hated me, but when I saw he was having a problem, I'd get him in a room and say, let's talk it out. What's your bitch? As far as I remember, he never talked about problems, but sometimes I felt kind of sorry for him. And if I had to pull him for improper uniform or something like that, I'd tell him to come by and work it out with push-ups instead of demerits. When I warned him at mess to be careful about what he put on his plate because he'd have to eat it whether he liked it or not, he'd slap everything on his plate. I don't remember his having to eat grits, but if he put them on his plate, he had to eat them. Mark Coker followed David Sullivan as one of Harry's sergeants, and while he was his sergeant, he tried to be his friend. I often felt Harry tried, he declared, though sometimes he made no effort. For example, in one instance, I specifically recall telling him that we were having a big inspection, and I wanted to make sure he shined his brass and shaved because I didn't want everybody to jump on him. That day when he came to formation, he was a mess. His shoes were dull, and his brass wasn't shined. He just looked absolutely terrible. I blew up because here I was doing everything I could for him, and I thought he should be doing something for me. You can only give a guy so many breaks. When he did things right, I told him. Then he'd beam and grow 8 feet tall. But when you told him he was doing something wrong, it made him feel he could do nothing right. That's the way Harry was. I found he deliberately hid his feelings, though sometimes he'd start to open up and then realize he was doing it and stop. He was stuck between a rock and a hard place. He didn't know what way to go. And that's the end of chapter, or section 26. All right, Pops, that's all for now. Goodbye.